Good morning, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed the off-season. Meteorologist Jim Dickey here with the first edition of Tracking the Tropics of 2020. Coming at you a good 2 weeks before the season officially begins on June 1st, because there's the potential for our first named storm of the season to form over the next 48 hours, which has become a sort of common occurrence in recent times. Looking back through 2015, it's been 5 consecutive years, soon to be 6, it appears, that we've had a storm form in the months of April or May. You go back to 2015, we had Ana. Bonnie, 2016, both of those storms brought some rain, some wind to the Carolinas. 2018, we had Alberto, which brought some rainfall here to Florida, made landfall in the Panhandle. Now, the good news is with this one, not necessarily expecting a landfall, but it is bringing some indirect impacts to parts of Florida here this morning with some much-needed welcome rainfall. And there's what we're looking at right now as we look across the entirety of the Atlantic. So we expect things to be quiet, and for the most part, they are. It's going to be months before we see much in the way of activity in the far eastern Atlantic. But when you get storms to develop this time of year, you tend to get them close to home. Storms develop from non-tropical systems that sort of stall out and sit there for a couple days. In this case, we had a front move into the Florida Straits going back to the early part of the week. It's been sitting there for a couple days, and gradually something's been brewing along it. And you can even from this far out make out the little bit of turning going on with the satellite presentation. As I zoom in, you can make that out much more clearly now. This is infrared satellite, by the way, and the bright yellow, the red you're seeing in the red circle I have is some deep convection, some big old thunderstorm clouds building up over what appears to be a little center of spin with this area of low pressure as it comes together. Further over Cuba, you have those clouds. You can track them moving from south and west to north and east. We start the loop over again for you. Over Florida, you have clouds more or less moving from north to south. You can make that broad counterclockwise swirl of that low pressure area. And that organization should continue. In fact, let's go ahead and switch over and take a look at the radar presentation from Key West this morning. So the Keys got absolutely soaked yesterday from this. It's going to likely end up being the biggest impact from this storm system, the inches of rain seen yesterday. But clearly on the radar presentation, there's your showers over the Keys moving from east to west, this rainfall moving northward, and right about here would be our center of low pressure, where something is trying to organize right now. And I think that organization continues. Certainly what the Hurricane Center is saying, this is their latest tropical weather outlook calling for an 80% chance of development as this area of low pressure moves its way over the Bahamas and into the broader southwest Atlantic. Again, the key, the movement, moving away from Florida. So it is going to end up taking the rainfall with it. Now, this could be tropical. This could be what's called subtropical. And I know that nomenclature gets a little bit confusing, but when we talk about tropical versus extratropical versus subtropical lows, what we're basically talking about is how these systems gain their energy, gain their strength. A tropical storm or a tropical cyclone gains energy, gains strength from warm waters. From warm waters rising, it's convection, thunderstorm clouds, that's how they develop and organize. An extratropical storm, so sort of like a nor'easter, think of a snowstorm over the middle of the country, that's fueled by perturbations in the jet stream, little waves that come across the country, areas of faster winds aloft that add a little more spin, and the collision of air masses dropping pressures at the surface. A subtropical storm, that's a little bit of both, sort of a hybrid. You get some fuel from the warmer waters, get a little jet stream energy to play in, and in this case, I think that's what we're talking here. So as you look at the water temperatures over the southwest Atlantic, numbers definitely warm enough to support tropical formation. Part of the reason we're talking about this right now is because waters are way above average in the western Atlantic, in the Gulf of Mexico, and generally speaking, the threshold you look for is 78 degrees. We definitely got that. In fact, look off the coast of Florida. You can clearly make out the Gulf Stream with water temperatures in the 80s off the east coast of Florida all the way up into the Carolinas. Now, a developing purely tropical system, once those warm waters, it also seeks out calm conditions as far as the upper-level winds are concerned to sort of allow those storms to grow, to proliferate, and then for the whole thing to sort of organize together. We do not have that. This is looking at wind shear. And anything in red is high wind shear, and that's really the entire Atlantic basin, which we expect. That's why storms don't typically form this time of year. The jet stream is all the way south, really, into the central Atlantic. The wind's just far too strong for something purely tropical to come together here out of this, I believe. But note, look over Florida and note how the winds are sort of dying down a little bit. There's that little bit of a dip in those winds. That's one of those perturbations in the jet stream I talked about. We call it a short wave. That's going to give it a little extra kick, and that's really what's going to help this thing come together and organize in that proper low pressure area going through the next 24 hours to develop into, again, that likely subtropical storm. This is the European forecast model. I have on here, too, those white lines are isobars. And clearly, by the time we get to Saturday evening, at least on our model here, we have a well-defined circulation. We've closed off an isobar to show that central low pressure. This is likely when we have Arthur sitting off the east coast of Florida. Now, we could be seeing winds along the coast of Florida, gusts 30, 35 miles per hour, perhaps towards tropical storm force. But in general, that's going to stay well offshore. However, with a subtropical storm, another thing to consider is that unlike a purely tropical system where the winds stay very close to the center, you spread out the wind field. So we will see those stronger gusts, like I said, towards the coast of Florida, and even perhaps into parts of the Carolinas as Sunday this tracks its way northward. Again, the center stays offshore, well offshore, but could get some rain bands to wash over the outer banks and some stronger wind gusts. By the time we get to early next week, and this is 5 a.m. Tuesday morning, there's a front sweeping off the east coast, and that's going to help to kick this away. Now, some models try to sort of phase this together, and I do think it's going to be some nasty weather in the Northeast and New England as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday. But you see the central low pressure area from this moving its way further out into the Atlantic by the time we get to Tuesday evening. So this is a system that stays out over the waters, not a direct landfall as we go through the next couple of days. Now, what about the next couple of days, the next 2 weeks leading up into the start of hurricane season? This, by all accounts, should be it. And it's what we expect to see. The water is just not nearly warm enough this time of year to support tropical formation across much of the Atlantic. Again, that 78-degree threshold. Only the Caribbean, parts of the Gulf, the Western Atlantic are there right now. Much of the open Atlantic, where we look for later in the season, is just too cool to support anything tropical. And then, like I said, the entire Atlantic basin is seeing very strong wind shear right now because the jet stream is still way south. We get into the summer, jet stream lifts northward, winds go calm, and that's when the conditions become right for tropical systems to try to come together. We also have lots of dry air out there right now. This time of year in particular, we get sweeps of Saharan dust to start to work their way eastward as the trade winds begin to develop. So that also is a deterring factor. So outside of this potential preseason system coming together in the next day or so, we are still going to keep that traditional, that expected calm through the next couple of weeks. So your takeaways today, yes, Arthur likely to form, perhaps purely tropical, but more than likely a hybrid subtropical system. It's not going to have much in the way of a direct impact on the United States. Wind gusts at times along the coast of Florida, the Carolinas, Georgia, 30, 40 miles per hour. And then, of course, hurricane season not far away, beginning on June 1st. Now, next week, NOAA releases their first forecast for the upcoming season. I'll have my next Tracking the Tropics video focused on that and the forecast for the season, which, in case you haven't heard, it looks like it's going to be an active one. So look for that sometime late next week. Until then, I'm meteorologist Jim Dickey. Have a great weekend.